Welcome to episode 5. Today we're at the Migration Museum in Adelaide. This is a great place to learn about Australia's migration history, and it's free to visit. It's also the perfect place to explore today's topic, the new nation of Australia at Federation. The displays highlight how changing government policies, such as the White Australia policy, affected the lives of ordinary people in Australia. Be sure to watch until the end of the video as we take a tour into Australian history at Federation. Today's episode is taken from Part 1 of Australian Citizenship, Our Common Bond. We're going to have a look at the nation of Australia at Federation on page 9. In the late 1800s, Australia was made up of 6 separate British colonies: New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, South Australia, Tasmania, and Western Australia. These colonies partly governed themselves, but they were also under the control of the British Parliament. Each colony had its own laws, railways, postage stamps, and taxes. These differences often caused problems, which led people to discuss the benefits of uniting to form a single nation. Federation would also allow Australia to have a united army for the country's defense. By the end of the 1800s, most of the people in each colony had been born in Australia, and there was a growing sense of national pride. This led many people to believe the colonies should be unified. In 1901, the separate colonies were united into a federation of states called the Commonwealth of Australia. Let's take a look at the key words in this sentence. Federation is when a group of organizations, countries, or regions join together to form a larger organization or government. New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, South Australia, Tasmania, and Western Australia join together to make the Commonwealth of Australia. The term Commonwealth was used in the British Empire to represent a self-governing place, which is how Australia was established. Commonwealth means that power is shared by the people for the common good. Let's say the key words together. 1901. Colonies. Federation. Commonwealth. It was at this time that our national democratic institutions, including our national parliament, government, and the High Court, were established under the new Australian Constitution. Let's take a look at the key words in this sentence. The word democratic comes from the word democracy. A democracy is when people vote for people to represent their views in Parliament. Democratic institutions are places that help societies follow democratic processes. The National Parliament is one of Australia's democratic institutions. It has four main roles: making and changing federal laws, representing the people of Australia, providing a place where government is formed, keeping a check on the work of the government. Australia's Commonwealth Parliament has two levels called houses: a lower house, the House of Representatives, where government is formed and new laws are introduced, and an upper house, the Senate, where new laws are reviewed. We'll learn more about the Australian Parliament later in episode 26, How is Australia Governed? The High Court of Australia was created at Federation as well. The High Court upholds Australian laws, interprets the Constitution, and settles disputes between the Commonwealth government and state governments. The Australian Constitution is the set of rules for how Australia is run. We can think of it as Australia's rule book. At Federation, the new Australian Constitution reorganised lawmaking power in Australia. The colonies, now called states, still controlled their police, hospitals, education, and public transport systems, but gave some of their lawmaking power to the new Commonwealth government. The Constitution made it clear that the Commonwealth government had the power to make laws about defence, foreign policy, immigration, trade, telecommunications, and postal services. Let's say the key words together. Democratic institutions, National Parliament, High Court, Australian Constitution. In 1901, Australia's population was about 4 million. This number did not include Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, as it was not until after a referendum in 1967 that they were included in official estimates of the Australian population. Let's think about this for a minute. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples were not considered citizens of Australia for the first 67 years of the new country's existence. They did not have the right to vote or to have anyone represent their communities in Parliament. They were not granted the same human rights that other people who lived in Australia were given. A referendum is a vote by all voters on a proposed change to the Australian Constitution. On the 27th of May, 1967, 90.77% of Australians voted to change the Constitution so that, like all other Australians, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples would be counted as part of the population, and the Commonwealth would be able to make laws for them. In the last episode, we learnt that in Australia, between 1910 and the 1970s, governments, churches, and welfare bodies forcibly removed many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children from their families. These children became known as the stolen generations. Their removal from their families and communities has left a legacy of trauma and loss that continues to affect Indigenous communities, families, and individuals today. The following information about the stolen generations is from australianstogether.org.au. I encourage you to check out this excellent website to learn more about the connection between our nation's past and present and how we can work towards a brighter future for all Australians. Why were Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children taken from their families? The forcible removal of Indigenous children from their families was based on assimilation policies, which claimed that the lives of Indigenous peoples would be improved if they became part of white society. Assimilation policies proposed that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples should be allowed to die out through a process of natural elimination or, where possible, assimilated into the white community. Policies focused on assimilating children as they were considered more adaptable to white society than adults. Children of mixed heritage, Indigenous and white, were particularly vulnerable to removal because authorities thought these children could be assimilated more easily into the white community due to their lighter skin color. Children taken from their parents were denied access to their families, communities, and cultures, and taught to reject their Indigenous heritage in favor of white culture. The children's names were often changed, and many children were forbidden from speaking Indigenous languages. Some children were adopted by white families, and many children were placed in institutions where abuse and neglect were common. The impact on children who were removed from their families. Many children were psychologically, physically, and sexually abused while living in state care and or with their adoptive families, leading to lifelong trauma. Efforts to make stolen children reject their cultures often created a sense of shame about being of Indigenous heritage. This resulted in children experiencing a disconnection from land, language, and culture, and an inability to pass cultural knowledge on to their own children. Many children were wrongly told that their parents were abusive, had died, or had abandoned them. Many children never knew where they'd been taken from or who their biological families were. Living conditions in the institutions where children were often placed were highly controlled, and children were frequently punished harshly, were cold and hungry, and received minimal, if any, affection. Children removed from their families generally received a very low level of education, as they were expected to work as manual laborers and domestic servants and received negligible, if any, payment for their services. This has had lifelong social and economic implications. The impact on parents and family members of First Nations children removed from their communities. Many parents never recovered from the grief of having their children removed. Some parents couldn't go on living without their children, while other parents turned to substance abuse as a coping mechanism. Many siblings were separated, and many Indigenous people are still searching for their parents and siblings. The impact on Indigenous descendants of members of the stolen generations. The forcible removal of Indigenous children from their families had a profound impact that's still being experienced today. The removal of several generations of children severely disrupted the passing on of Indigenous cultures. Much cultural knowledge has been lost. People who were removed as children were often deprived of living in a healthy family situation and prevented from learning parenting skills. In some instances, this has resulted in generations of children being raised in state or foster care. It's led to many Indigenous people suffering a loss of identity and culture and left many families living with intergenerational trauma in a cycle of abuse and violence. What does the history of the stolen generations mean for all Australians today? Stolen generations survivors and their descendants still experience greater disadvantage when compared to non-Indigenous Australians. In 2008, the Australian government made a formal commitment to address Indigenous disadvantage in Australia, called Closing the Gap. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities often have a shorter life expectancy, higher rates of infant mortality, poorer health, lower levels of education and employment. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities often experience higher rates of violence, alcohol and illicit drug use, mental health issues, and childhood experience of violence. Double the rate of suicide and self-harm. 26 times the rate of youth incarceration compared to non-Indigenous youth. The Closing the Gap strategy has resulted in some improvements, but there's still a long way to go. What can we do as new citizens of Australia to help respect Indigenous history and address Indigenous disadvantage in Australia? We can start by learning as much as we can about Indigenous cultures in Australia. You might want to watch First Australians on SBS On Demand, a free 7-episode documentary series with subtitles that explores the stories of Aboriginal peoples, histories, and cultures. You can also see what Indigenous events are being held in your community through your local council, community centers, schools, and museums. We can acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we live or work on. We'll learn more about Welcome to Country and Acknowledgement of Country protocols in Episode 9. We might want to support local Indigenous businesses. Supply Nation is a national directory of Indigenous businesses. You might also want to learn about Indigenous artists and musicians. We can learn about important dates for Indigenous people in Australia, such as NAIDOC Week, which is a week-long celebration of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures, histories, and achievements. It takes place annually in the first week of July. Or National Sorry Day on the 26th of May. Each year, these dates are an opportunity for all people who call Australia home to learn more by listening to the voices of Indigenous people who are affected by the stolen generations. Throughout the first half of the 20th century, migration levels rose and fell. There were programs to actively encourage British migrants to settle here, and many did. In 1901, the Immigration Restriction Act became law. It was one of the first laws passed by the new Australian Federal Parliament. The law was designed to allow British people to migrate to Australia and limit all other migration. The colonies had restrictive immigration laws before Federation, but the Act formalized the idea of a white Australia as national policy. The policy lasted until the 1960s and was completely removed by the Racial Discrimination Act in 1975. In the 1800s, most white people in Australia shared views that today we would call racist. They believed that non-white people were not as clever or as moral as white people. The people who held these views particularly feared Asian immigration, but applied their ideas to all non-white people, including Indigenous Australians, who they considered a dying race. Australia saw itself as a working man's paradise that promoted equal rights and opportunities, but these ideas only applied to desirable citizens. The nation wanted to attract male, white, and skilled workers. Non-white people, and even sometimes working women, were seen as a threat. Because of these views, many of the colonies limited migration from many countries and encouraged the immigration of male, white, and skilled laborers from Britain. Non-white immigration grew with the gold rushes in the 1850s and 1860s, and with the arrival of Pacific Island laborers. A rise in non-white migration made many white Australians fearful. Migrants often worked for less pay or sold goods cheaper than white-owned businesses, leading to economic tensions on top of existing racism. Under the Immigration Restriction Act of 1901, migrants who entered Australia between 1901 and 1958 could be asked to take a dictation test. To pass the test, they needed to write 50 words in any European language as dictated by the immigration officer. After 1905, the officer could choose any language at all. A Chinese immigrant, for example, could be asked to write out 50 words in French, Italian, or another language. Even if they passed the test in English, they could be made to sit the test again in different languages until they failed. White British migrants were not made to sit the test. Few migrants could pass the test in these circumstances. This meant that it was easy to fail an applicant if they were from an undesirable country, had a criminal record, had medical issues, or were thought to be morally unfit. If an applicant failed the test, they could be deported by the Australian government. The test was really a way of stopping non-white migrants from entering Australia. Only 52 people passed the test between 1901 and 1909, and no one passed after 1909. In 1901, 2 more acts limited migration to Australia. The Pacific Islanders Labourers Act 1901 outlawed imported labour, and the Post and Telegraph Act 1901 banned non-white workers from transporting Australian mail. The White Australia policy immediately changed Australia. By 1947, only 2.7% of the population was born outside Australia, Ireland, or the United Kingdom. Australia's Asian population had shrunk from 1.25% in 1901 to 0.21% by the late 1940s. The Immigration Restriction Act and Dictation Test ended in 1958. Other parts of the White Australia policy, such as the registration of non-British migrants as aliens, continued into the early 1970s. The Racial Discrimination Act 1975 made it illegal to discriminate against migrants based on their race. It removed the last traces of the White Australia policy. Despite the White Australia policy, people from all over the world settled in Australia, creating the multicultural society we see today. Let's say the key words together. 1901, population 4 million. 1967, referendum, Aboriginal population. 20th century, migration rose and fell. British migrants. Let's review the first part of the text from the Nation of Australia on page 9. Remember, the questions on the Citizenship test will only use the words from the Our Common Bond booklet. Let's read it together. The Nation of Australia at Federation. In 1901, the separate colonies were united into a federation of states called the Commonwealth of Australia. It was at this time that our national democratic institutions, including our national parliament, government, and the High Court, were established under the new Australian Constitution. In 1901, Australia's population was about 4 million. This number did not include Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, as it was not until after a referendum in 1967 that they were included in official estimates of the Australian population. Throughout the first half of the 20th century, migration levels rose and fell. There were programs to actively encourage British migrants to settle here, and many did. Let's have a look at a practice test question. When did the separate colonies join together to become the Australian nation? A. 1601, B. 1901, C. 2001. Yes, answer B, 1901 is correct. We know that colonies expanded throughout Australia after the first fleet arrived in 1788, and that in 1901 the separate colonies were united into a federation of states called the Commonwealth of Australia. That's it for today's episode. If you have any questions, please write them in the comments section. I'll do my best to help in any way I can. If you found this video helpful, please click on like and subscribe to help me grow this channel. This will also help you see when new episodes are ready to watch. Please enjoy this look at the exhibits from the early 20th century from the Migration Museum in Adelaide. See you in the next episode.